Hello and welcome to our LJMU Lightning Lunch session, where today's focus is on business. My name's Caroline Berry and I'm joined today by one of our lecturers from Liverpool Business School, Gemma Dale. Before I hand over to Gemma for her talk, I'll just explain what's going to happen today in our webinar. If Gemma, you wouldn't mind changing the slide. So although you can see and hear us, we can't see you, so you can sit back and relax and enjoy the talk. This will be recorded so you can watch the session on demand later on. There will be an opportunity for you to ask us any questions. If you have a look at the Q&A button, probably at the bottom of your screen, you can type any questions that pop into your head whilst Gemma's talking, and I will read those out at the end and hopefully Gemma can answer them. So without further ado, I will hand over to Gemma and please enjoy.
Hello, and I'm going to be talking a little bit today about the future of work and what it means for you. But there's a bit of a problem because we're not actually that good at predicting the future, as we can see from some of the things on the screen here. There's a couple of pictures from science fiction films that pretty much said by now we should all be moving around in flying cars. But on more of a business front, you can see here back in the 1940s, the chief executive of IBM thought there might be a market for 5 computers in the whole world. Over the years, so-called experts have said that there was no market for cars, for cinema, for train travels, or even for planes. And again, back in the 1940s, an expectation that computers would weigh about the size of a small car. I would imagine if we talked to those people now and showed them a mobile phone, they would be somewhat surprised about its computing power and potentially even its weight. And there's lots of examples of this. So we know it's really hard to predict the future, but when it comes to things like business, work and jobs, we still need to try and do that, because we need to think about how do we ensure that we are preparing current students and future graduates for a world of work, and how do we get business ready for the changes that might come. So predicting the future is really hard, but we need to think about it all the same. I'm going to start, if I may, with just a little bit of theory, though, about the past. So, the first industrial revolution. This goes back to the late 1700s and early 1800s. So this was the time when work started to be less about things that we did with our hands, so farming, hand production, into things like steam power and water power. The second industrial revolution was started to be known as the technological revolution. So this is the late 1870s into around 1915. And this is when we started to get train networks, railroads and telegraphs, which allowed for more transfer of people and ideas. And we also get electricity at this point, which really changed how businesses worked and how people lived. We then had the third industrial revolution. So we're now up to about the 20th century and at the end of 2 world wars. And we start to see, again, much more of digital technology starting to come into our lives and the workplace. But what we're predicting now is what we call the fourth industrial revolution. So building again on all of that digital technology that's happened in the last few decades, and starting to truly embrace the potential of future technology. And this essentially is the world of work that we are moving towards. The speed of current technological breakthroughs has no historical precedent. When we compare the potential of the fourth industrial revolution to those that came before it, technology is evolving at a huge rate, not just a slow linear pace. Every single way that we live and work has been disrupted and will continue to be disrupted. So what else is happening? What are we seeing in the world of work globally? Well, first of all, people are working a lot longer than they used to. If I wind back a couple of generations, maybe to your grandparents, it was pretty normal to retire at about 60 or 65. We had these really traditional lives. We went to education, we had work, and then we had retirement. We call it the 3-stage life. But actually, people are living a lot longer now. 1 in 3 people born today will live to be 100. So we are at the same time working much longer, and you will probably have a much longer working lifetime before you retire than your parents and your grandparents, the generations that came before. We're also seeing lots of changes around the types of jobs that are available, and I'm going to talk more about that in a few slides' time. We've also got more generations in the workplace than we ever have before. As people are working longer, and of course technology, and I'm going to talk much more about that, but also globalization. So this idea that we live in much more of an increasingly global world. We are competing for jobs globally, not just locally. Labour markets are much more integrated, and we can buy and sell all over the world much easier than we ever have been able to do at any point in history. So back to that technology stuff. Tech is speeding up. Let me show you my next slide. When television was introduced for the first time, when it was invented, it took 13 years before 50 million people globally had a television. Let me try and compare that with a couple of other things. It took 12 years for 50 million people to have a mobile phone. It took 7 years for 50 million people to get the internet. When Facebook launched, it took them 4 years to get 50 million users. It took Twitter 2 years. And a couple of years ago, Pokemon Go reached 50 million people in 19 days. So that gives you an indication of just how quickly technology has speeded up in really what's been less than about 60 years. What else is going on in the world of work? Well, organisations are rethinking, redeveloping, and reinventing themselves all the time. Climate change, sustainability, they're huge issues for all of us across the globe. And in the last 10 years or so, we've started to see organisations take that much more seriously, really thinking about their global footprint, how they do business in an ethical and responsible way. And we are going to continue to see that be a big driver of how organisations act now and in the future. We've got all the technology things that I've talked about: automation, virtual reality, artificial intelligence. All of these things are coming. You can see in the middle of your screen there, you can see a 3D printer. We also see all the time new organisations coming online. Uber simply didn't exist a few years ago. So we can see all of these different trends coming together: the globalization, the longer working lives, people living longer, and all this technology coming together to give us a fundamentally different world. Let me talk about tech a little bit more. Quite a few stats for you on this slide, but some really interesting things that just talk really and put into context how tech is changing everything about how we live and how we work, and why whichever career you choose to go into in your future, tech is going to play some part of that. Let me just pick a couple of these. 500 million tweets sent every day globally, 24 hours of content uploaded onto YouTube every single minute, 1.2 trillion searches on Google. The average UK internet user spends on average 3 hours and 29 minutes using the internet every day. I wonder where you feel you are in comparison to those statistics. In the UK, people checking their smartphone on average every 12 minutes. If you stand in a queue, like in a train station or a shop, most people check their phones within 20 seconds of standing there. We are constantly connected to those digital devices in our pockets. Could we live without the internet? It would be a very different world if we tried. So again, we can see just through a few of these statistics, we see just how tech is involved in every single part of our lives. And for graduates, for students, that has a really important meaning. Take a look at this quote to illustrate what I mean. McKinsey are a global organisation. They are a consultancy firm. And as you can see here, their research indicates that by 2030, which is not that far away, 8 to 9% of the workforce, so people in jobs, will be employed in jobs that do not exist today, jobs that we may not even be able to think about. Let's look at that from a historical perspective. A few jobs that 20 years ago simply didn't exist, or if they did exist, they were really in their infancy because the technology was in its infancy, or we simply hadn't invented the thing. Social media managers, digital marketing specialists, bloggers, and most of those, I think, with the exception of a Zumba instructor there, which is 20 years old, apparently this very weekend as I'm filming this. Most of those are, of course, roles that involve tech because the tech simply wasn't there. Let's come forward 10 years. Jobs that didn't exist 10 years ago. Uber drivers. Well, Uber didn't exist, and neither really did the technology that allowed the Uber to simply exist, to connect people through phones to transport. Drone operators, YouTube influencers, podcast producers, AI engineers, 3D printing engineers, virtual assistants, or even an Etsy store owner. These jobs didn't exist 10 years ago. Now, most of this is about tech, but it's not just tech that's changing our world and changing the future of work, because it's also the global pandemic, because these jobs didn't exist just over a year ago either. I think we can probably all agree we really wish they didn't exist now. But the first two on this list are about the pandemic itself. The other one is something that has evolved from the pandemic, which is this idea that actually a lot of people who worked in offices, which is about 50% of the UK population, have decided they don't really want to go back to their offices 5 days a week. And what they want to do is work in what we've started to call hybrid ways of working, which means you spend a bit of your time working from home and a bit of your time in an office. So one prediction I think I can make with some certainty, despite what I said earlier about the difficulties of predicting the future of work, is that you're probably, if you go into an office-based profession, what we sometimes call knowledge work, you'll probably spend some of your time working from home or working remotely in the future. We're currently talking to graduates about what they think about that and what it might mean for them. Companies are also rethinking about what this means for them. They're wondering, do we need these huge offices, these city centre offices? Should we move out of the centre of London or some of the other big cities that have been hubs and where people have gone to live and work? And should we do something else instead? This might impact where you can work. And there could be a really good thing about that. I was reading yesterday about people who've simply gone during this time. They're normally working in offices, but they've gone to work abroad. And they're doing the same work, but from places with probably a little bit more sunshine than where I'm talking to you from today. So it could open up all new opportunities, but it will also mean that you're probably going to need different types of skills as well. So the big question that I can't answer for you today is what jobs will exist in 5 years or 10 or 20. If you want to try a little test after this lecture, why not go over to the website you can see on your screen? It's called willrobotstakemyjob.com. And if you put in the kind of job that you're thinking about looking for in the future, it will give you an indication based on current research whether or not that job is likely to exist in the future and how likely that job is to be automated. Definitely worth a try. I've looked, and for the moment, I'm reasonably safe. So I'm seeing that as a good thing. But we know that work is always changing. We know, therefore, that the skills, graduates, students and young people entering the job market for the first time will change as well. Some of the jobs may no longer exist, or you may end up working in jobs that we cannot conceivably think of existing right now. I like this quote too. Technologies that haven't yet been invented will solve problems that aren't even problems yet. So, on to what does this mean for you? Well, it means that in reality, you're going to have to probably spend quite a lot of time learning new skills during your career. If your working life is likely to be 50 years, whatever you're studying now, whatever you might choose to go on and study in the next 3 or 4 or 5 years, the chances are you'll have to continually keep those skills up to date. You may even have more than one type of career during that lifetime. You may work for a few years, go back and study and learn something else. One of the most important things you can always do, of course, is keep your skills up to date. So we know that workplaces are going to change. Where they are might change. We may also see more of what we call the rise of the gig economy. So more and more in the last probably 5 to 10 years, more people have become self-employed than ever before in the UK. And some of them work in this, as I said, this gig economy. So having more than one job or having lots of short-term contracts, we sometimes call this a portfolio career. So you would end up having more than one part-time job. As I've already said, remote working is likely to be part of most people's future who undertake knowledge work. But then, of course, there's the opportunities of a much more global world where you might be able to work anywhere or anywhen. Another quote that I really like, which is about how we are currently preparing students for jobs that don't yet exist, using technologies that haven't been invented in order to solve problems we don't know are problems yet. That's our job in the business school, is to make sure that whatever skills you leave with will future-proof you for whatever those technologies turn out to deliver to us, however we end up living or working in the future. And some of those skills are these here. So as the world is in this sort of constant state of flux, there are some skills that really will stand the test of time, and there are some skills that really can't be automated or can't be undertaken by a robot. I've already talked about the two in bold. So even though we know that technology will be a huge part of our lives, one of the skills that you will need is how to keep up to date and keep refreshing and learning those new technologies as they come online so that you are ahead of the curve. The other thing is the skill, of course, is learning how to learn, ensuring that you keep your skills up to date. But also some of the other things you can see here, being emotionally intelligent. And what we mean by that is being able to show empathy and build relationships well with other people, to think critically, to be able to analyse and come up with new ideas, to be creative, to be resilient for change. So when those changes do come along, being able to cope with them and run with it and bounce back and adapt. And all those people skills, simply being able to get on well with people and build those relationships. The next decade, partly because of COVID, is likely to be a time of intense change, particularly in the world of work and possibly in the world of education. The World Economic Forum predicts that we will need globally to reskill more than 1 billion people by 2030 as that fourth industrial revolution comes online and jobs are transformed by technology. And that will apply to those existing jobs, and those ones that we've already acknowledged, we simply don't know that will exist yet. So one of the things I can encourage you to do is be open-minded. Don't be one of those people we saw on my first slide who just rejected these new ideas and these new technologies when they came along and said, no one's going to want a car, no one's going to want to fly anywhere in a plane, and there's only a need in the world for 5 computers. A couple of other quotes, if I may. This is Charles Darwin, who talks about the importance of adaptability. As we've already seen, as things change at a rapid pace and change is constant, adapting is a key skill. We often like to stay in our comfort zone, don't we? And just do the things that we know we're already good at, because our comfort zone is, well, it's comfortable. But actually, when we step outside our comfort zone, when we try new things, that is where we truly learn and where we truly develop. So this isn't a quote, this is me. And what I always say to my students is, your education in the context I'm talking about today, it's just the beginning. The subjects that you choose to study are just one part of your very changing future. Finally, if I may, economic security will not come in the future from having a job for life. You won't leave full-time education, you won't graduate from university, settle on a career and do it for 50 years. That's just not really that likely. But actually, your economic security, your future, will come from having those skills, being adaptable and continuing to learn. And as leading management thinker Peter Drucker says, the best way to predict your future is to create it. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Gemma. That was absolutely fascinating. And I think at the outset, I thought everything could be pretty negative. And by the end of it, you realise that there's so much opportunity out there as long as everybody's adaptable and flexible. So thank you for that. So thank you for joining us today. If you are interested in further talks, please visit our website and you can sign up for other Lightning Lunch talks. If you have any questions, please do email outreach@ljmu.ac.uk. And if you have any questions for Gemma going forwards, please do forward those to that email as well, and I'll be happy to pass them on. So thank you everybody for listening and have a good day. And thank you so much for Gemma for your talk today. Thank you.